Welcome to Liberty, Literacy, and Legacy. I am Christina Boggess, and this is where we examine education and governance as they actually function, not as they are marketed, not as they appear in campaign slogans, and not as they are softened in press releases, but as structural forces shaping a nation. Liberty does not survive without literacy, and literacy does not endure without virtue. And legacy, my dear friends, is never accidental, it is intentionally built. But tonight we are not analyzing a bill, we are analyzing the people who write them because there is an uncomfortable truth in modern civic life. Most voters do not lose liberty because they meant to. They lose it because they failed to vet the people they elected. In a constitutional republic, elections are not personality contests, they are structural decisions. Every candidate elected becomes a lever of authority. That lever writes law, and law shapes institutions, and institutions shape the formation of the next generation. Liberty rarely collapses dramatically. It erodes administratively through incremental votes cast by officials who were never properly scrutinized. Literacy, therefore, is not simply the ability to read campaign mailers, it's the ability to read power. And legacy is not determined on election day, it's determined months before, when citizens either practice disciplined discernment or they outsource it. Tonight, we are going to build a framework for doing this properly, not emotionally, not tribally, not structurally, because if education shapes a nation, and it does, then the people who govern education shape its future. Let's begin. Tonight,
Did you vet this candidate? I can't see a thing! This magnifying glass is broken! The ink is everywhere! Vet before you vote!
tonight we have with us Emily Green. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Excited about this discussion.
I am so excited about this discussion. We start always with the liberty lens. Tell me more about that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think with the liberty lens, it comes down to follow the power. Um,
Ooh.
if you remember nothing else from this conversation, remember this, that every candidate is a lever. When voters elect someone to office, they're not selecting a personality, they are authorizing power.
Yes.
That authority writes the policy, it allocates funding, it establishes regulatory frameworks, it appoints commissions and boards, it creates enforcement mechanisms. Power always moves somewhere, and the only question is where.
Oh, you hit the nail on the head. You just described our jobs.
Yes.
We do a little bit of that. Hopefully, we do it well. I think that there's so much packed in there. If we can back up just a little bit, I love when you said when voters elect someone to office, they are not selecting a personality, they are authorizing power. And that authority writes policy, it allocates funding, and there's power. Dollars and cents follow the power, right? You want to know who rules the world, follow the money. The regulatory frameworks. If you want things to get really expensive, get the government involved. Commissions and boards and enforcement mechanisms. Laws without teeth are merely suggestions, right? And I love that you brought that to our attention. So, what are the questions that we should be asking, Emily, when we're vetting a candidate? Citizens must ask disciplined questions. Let's just start with one and then discuss it. What are your thoughts?
I think that's a great idea. And I want to back up real quick as well, if I can,
Yeah.
to electing personality. I
Mm,
actually like that's really come to the forefront because I think we've actually done that for a really long time.
absolutely.
And it's almost kind of like a high school candidacy, like running like who looks really good. And we all want to look good. And I think that,
Yeah.
looks sell. But I feel
Yeah.
like where we are as a society, as a country, we are really kind of stepping back and questioning that.
Mhm.
We're realizing that, hey, pretty people can struggle in doing the
Well,
right thing. And
yes.
but I think that we don't know what it is that we should be looking for. If it's not the looks that we need to be searching for, what is it that we need
Yeah.
to be searching for? And this is why I'm so happy we're talking about this, because there's a whole world that
Yes.
that we're going to enter in tonight about what to
Hmm.
look for in a candidate. And I was thinking about this today, and I know it's kind of silly, but The Voice, when
Yes. Yeah.
that singer comes
Hmm.
out on the stage and
Yeah.
those judges are faced away, and and they're closing their eyes and they're hearing the voice, like
Hmm.
the tone, the vibrato, the song, like all the things, and they decide that they want to work with this person because
Ah.
person has checked off boxes where they're like,
Hmm.
I know that this is somebody that I'm probably really going to work with. And they hit the buzzer and they turn around. So I would say horrible analogy, but let's run with it.
Well, if I can interrupt, I don't think it's
Yeah.
a horrible analogy. That's exactly how we should be choosing people. We should be listening for
Yes.
all the right things and asking all the right questions, because it's not about the applause line, it's not about the yard sign. It is about the voice and the voice that they bring into the policy making space. And that voice comes with a vote, and that vote has power. And so I would argue that it's a great analogy. I think you did wonderful work right there.
Thank you. Well, and so if we were to let's move forward then. Questions. Let's start out with, when vetting a candidate, does this candidate expand bureaucratic authority? That one's going to be hitter. We're going to jump right into that one.
We're just going to jump right into that. Well, I think with the way the legislative session is going, my friend, I think we've got a little bit to be concerned about when it comes to bureaucratic authority. So as our state in Utah approaches this next election, that is a great question. And I think we need to think about, what does it mean to expand bureaucratic authority? Are we developing levels of chaos underneath the decision makers that are unaccountable to the electorate? And so are we having, I don't know, advisory groups tell the boards what to do, tell the legislature what to do? Are we going to create a study session out of a bill? We're just going to study it for a little while and let everybody else come back and tell us what to do. I think it's a great question. And so, I'm kind of anti incumbent, especially in my state. We have some really great legislators. There's a few, and I would vote for them in a heartbeat, but there's a lot of them that absolutely expand bureaucratic authority, and I would encourage us to choose people who believe in small government. And so I think that's a great question. What is another one? What are your thoughts as you're kind of talking about this in your family and among your peers?
Well, I think with the bureaucratic authority, one that tags close to that is, do they centralize governance upward into administrative agencies,
Oh,
which
I,
is another heavy hitter.
mhm.
I know.
Yes. I think the number one complaint that we get, or that I've gotten in different times in my service on the board, is complaints about the High School Activities Association. And that would be an example of that, where governance is centralized into an administrative agency that's actually not accountable to the voters, but it is taxpayer funded, and there's a line item there. And so it's an interesting way of looking at it. There was a bill this session to move that agency under the Utah State Board of Education. I don't think it passed, but it was a discussion because of that. What else are we looking at?
Or do they delegate decision making to unelected commissions? And
That's
that one is a big one. We should
hmm
spend a second on that one.
I love what we're talking about, because when you see a bill, I look at a bill very differently from others. The first thing I do is I ask myself, what does it do? What does it undo? And how is it exempted or accepted? Because if it's something where we are restraining government, I want to know, what are the exceptions and the exemptions to that restrainment. And then when I'm looking at other things where it says you have to do these things, I'm looking at the exceptions and the exemptions, and then what is it going to do in real time. And so when you talk about delegating decision making power to unelected commissions, nothing is ever more true than it was with SB 127, where we put so much of the Utah State Boards of Education power into unelected commission. I know a lot of people like this unelected commission, but it's the Board of the Science of Reading. They technically have a lot of power, but they are not elected, and that came out of SB 127. I also think we need to look at, like, how do they tie local institutions to federal grants and compliance frameworks? Everybody talks about getting the federal government out of our business, but there are hundreds upon hundreds of bills at the legislature, and they tie us to the federal government over and over and over again. So we pass a 10th Amendment bill, but yet we're tying ourselves with federal grants and compliance frameworks and it's important because power rarely decentralizes itself. What are your other thoughts?
No, another one is, do they tie schools or districts to specific vendors or institutional partners?
Oh,
Now,
I
this
think
is
that,
also known as a vendor bill, which
yes.
to anybody that this was new to me, I had to really take some time to step back and
Hmm.
understand what a vendor bill is, um,
Yes,
because those ones actually show up quite a bit. I do want to highlight a little bit of about what a vendor bill is.
absolutely. So a vendor bill is basically a no bid contract that says you have to do this and you have to do it with this vendor, and they can charge you whatever they want.
Not good.
That's the Cliff Note version. Sometimes there's a fiscal note attached to it, but then what will happen, like, for example, in our business at the board, what has happened is we'll run these vendor bill contracts at the behest of the Utah State Legislature, and then that vendor will always come back to amend the contract for more money or for more of this or for more of whatever. And because we cannot float an RFP, we have to deal with a specific vendor. It's deeply, deeply concerning when we do that. um, I think it's deeply concerning when they put it into code.
Yes. And does how does this tie with the public-private arrangements that can shift authority away from elected oversight?
Oh, it's very similar. So public-private partnerships exist all over. In fact, I would argue that they run our state. Other people might disagree with me, but I would argue that we've got 3P relationships everywhere. And some of that is when we put like a government program in the hands of an NGO, and they get money from the government to do government work. There's no accountability. There's no accountability for the money. It's kind of a mess. An example of a public-private partnership would be what we did with the Utah Fits All money. We give that money to a private entity, and then they do the business of the scholarship. And then when the complaints come rolling into the Utah State Board of Education, all we get to tell them as board members is we are prohibited from assisting you by Utah legislative code. It's kind of an interesting 3P relationship. So,
Absolutely. You
yeah.
know, there's another realm too where do we create things that add additional regulatory layers where there's
Mm.
simpler solutions that can exist?
I think this is a great question to ask people as you're vetting candidates, because there's so much there where legislators will get on the Hill, and even board members. Nothing is worse than a bill written to a survey of one, where we should be legislating to a cross section of a society. We should not be legislating to a single incident. But that's where we find ourselves in this day and age. And I think part of that is when your local people abrogate their responsibility and then they're derelict in their duty, you're looking at a place where power will centralize, and power rarely decentralizes itself. So I would look really carefully at how candidates approach structural governance, because we are complex because the people we elected have made us complex.
Yes. Well, and I've been saying this for a little while in the way that we can
Hmm.
legislate ourselves into straitjackets.
Yes.
And I think it's very alarming. And I think anybody that follows the educational bills that come forward, I mean, just hundreds
Hmm.
every year, just every year.
Oh, yeah.
And it's getting out of control. It's already out of control. Um, and I think that we are seeing so many things come through because what I hear and what I see when something comes forward, somebody is concerned about something,
Hmm.
have a genuine interest to solve it.
Hmm.
they create a bill to try and address that. It has to go through
Yep.
that rigorous process to get, approved or denied.
Mhm. Yep.
I feel that there is a point, and I feel like we've reached that tipping point where we just have too many, and we are putting ourselves in straitjackets. And then people, whatever side you may agree or disagree on it, you're creating arguments, um, and then we just have infighting, and we're fighting back and forth, and we don't go anywhere. And people can interpret the law in a way that's good for them and bad for another. So, how much good are we really doing? And how much is it actually harming us? How much are we putting ourselves in a straitjacket? Because I think we need to put the brakes on. There,
I would agree.
if we value freedom as a
Mhm.
people, I think there are some concepts that we have misrepresented in our society right now and in our culture. That, like,
Abs-
what is freedom? What
yeah.
is a moral society? There are
Mhm.
tenets there that we used to abide by. I mean, they're in, and it's in 53G dash something 204. I
Ah.
had it on my wall. It's not here anymore. I don't know where it went, but
I
it
believe it's 53G10-204.
yeah, it lists all of those beautiful characteristics
Mhm.
of what a Utah citizen is, and
Mhm.
that kind of just used to be how we raised our families. We
Yes.
structured our cities. We were accountable to ourselves, our families, our community, probably first and foremost to
Mhm.
God. Um, and I feel like there was a level of freedom that exists in that restraint, like freedom and restraint.
Mhm.
Um, but it's like right now, the political scene is it's a free for all to do anything and try to fit it into a bill so it makes sense, and you're
Yes.
going to force everybody to do it. And I think it comes from both sides. So we need to
Mhm.
just stop and take a breath, and I guess come back to the questions that we've listed here.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's so much wrong with how we legislate these days, and I think that probably it is likely an issue in every state, but it's a real problem in Utah. Our legislative session is fast and furious. There's not a lot of public eyes on things. You see things kind of slid in, and the most dangerous days are the last 2 days of the session because sometimes one year over half the bills that were passed in the legislative session were passed in the final 2 days of the session, and that's deeply concerning. So if I could, Emily, I want to take us to just, when you're looking at a candidate, campaign promises are often aspirational, but voting records are operational. So as we approach this election season where we're vetting candidates, if you want to understand a candidate, look at their voting record and compare it to a set of principles and ideals. Um, for example, if you poll just five, I mean, you can pull all you want, but if you pull just five, I think you need to look at votes and ask yourself the questions: do these votes increase transparency or do they reduce it? Do they strengthen local authority or do they weaken it? Do they expand bureaucratic oversight or restrain it? Because if you look at those things and evaluate those votes through that lens, you will learn more from those five votes that you've evaluated than from 50 campaign speeches. It's my argument that liberty is not lost theatrically, it's lost procedurally. What do you think?
I agree, and I'm gonna highlight two things. First,
Mhm.
sometimes I wonder, and I only wonder because I guess I went through this, I experienced this, that this
Mhm.
type of work is not a campaign speech. And there comes a point where you recognize that your campaign speech has to manifest
Yes.
through a vote. And
Mhm.
so if you don't know how that works, you're going to have either a learning curve, or you're just going to get it wrong. And you're going to think that you're doing good work when really it's like you are so far from what you campaigned and what you
Mhm.
made your constituents who voted for you think that you're doing. You're so far from that with your vote.
Mhm.
You don't even recognize it. The second thing is learning how to translate. There is a way to take your
Mhm.
campaign speech and translate it into, those quality checks. The word that I use, quality check. Do those
Mhm.
votes increase transparency or reduce it? Do they strengthen local authority or weaken it? Do they expand bureaucratic oversight or restrain it? And you can check yourself and make sure
Yes.
what those are, and then you will be able to vote pretty dang good.
Oh, absolutely. I have a voting guide that I keep with me. And, I used it so much in the beginning of my time on the board that I don't get it out as often, but it's always in my head.
Yeah.
And it's got red and it's got green on it, and it guides every decision I make because it is what I talked about on the campaign trail. And I think it's so important that we say who we're going to be and then we be who we say we're going to be. And I think the biggest disappointment that I've had is watching candidates say they're going to be one thing and walk in and be something totally different. It has made me deeply sad.
Well, and I think you summed it up very well. You summarized this, that liberty is not lost theatrically, it is lost procedurally.
Yes.
And a campaign, there's a lot of theatrics. There's a lot of theatrics.
Yay. Lots of facade in
There, there
campaigns.
is, and heck, a person putting themselves out, they're gonna bring their, you know, their best self, and they work really hard. We all know that that campaign speech is super important, and how
Yes.
you interface with people is very important. And you can collect a lot of information about a person when you vet them. Vetting is so important. But
Yeah.
as we continue to have this discussion, what I hope that we can do is broaden people's awareness so that they understand and they know how to see past the theatrics and get down to
Yes.
like the procedural reality of what it
Hmm.
means to be in an elected position. I mean, we talk often about literacy in education.
Hmm.
We talk about reading proficiency, curriculum design, instructional effectiveness, but civic literacy precedes all of those conversations.
May
So,
I clap for you right now?
thank you.
Can you just repeat that? Because I think that's a great one-liner.
Yes, civic literacy precedes all of those conversations.
Absolutely. It precedes reading proficiency, curriculum, instruction. Civic literacy precedes all of those conversations. Please go on. I love it.
Well, a voter must be literate enough to decode political language. I'm just going to stop there to anybody listening. Do you know that there is political language?
Mhm.
Because if you didn't, now you know, and now you need to listen because this is really, really important because we're in an election cycle this year. You have people that are your favorite that are up for re-election. You have new people that have entered, onto the stage.
Yes.
You've
Hmm.
got to have language. So I think it's a fair statement that most voters are emotionally engaged in politics. And again, we are at a point where we have to recognize voting based off of emotion is not working well anymore. It cannot work that way anymore. The
No.
stakes are too high. The
Yep.
political dynamics have shifted
Hmm.
so much that we either get it right and we start learning this language, or we're going to lose a lot more than, a pretty face on the campaign trail.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. I would argue that we should do an entire podcast on decoding political language
yes.
because it is, I've written posts about it, I've written articles about it. The political language in this state is, first of all, it's riddled with gaslighting and spiritual abuse, but it's also language that defines who people, quote unquote, are when they're really not. And when I ran, I don't know if you were ever given tips, but when I ran for office, my hair had to be a certain length. I had to wear the same outfit every time because people would attach to my outfit. So my outfit had to be a certain way. And they made me do different things that at some point I was like, oh, I guess this is effective. But people need to decode that political language and understand it at a deep level because their literacy in vetting campaigns and vetting candidates is what is going to change the future of our nation. And voting emotionally, I don't give two rips if you like John on the ballot. I care whether or not John is going to vote in a way that restrains government, that preserves liberty, and that is structurally literate. And, I would argue that most voters don't understand government infrastructure, but
Right.
do candidates understand government infrastructure? Are they structurally literate? Because when candidates speak, people need to listen carefully to the words they choose, because you're going to hear sounds and phrases that sound universally appealing, and it's rooted in kind of this manipulation. It's always framed in a certain way. And I can tell you that because I framed things in a certain way. When I ran for office, I framed things in a way that people could swallow well. So you want to look to the heart of what somebody is saying and not just the words they're using. So people will use words like justice. They'll use words like data driven, evidence based, best practices, or community centered. And those words themselves are not inherently problematic, but they're operationally meaningless unless defined. So we can talk great game, but until we ask our candidates to define these words operationally, not just a definition, but an operational definition, we don't want them to be representing us, not unless they can do that for their constituents. And civic literacy requires voters to ask three simple questions, in my opinion. Define it, not philosophically, but operationally. What statute or term do these words reference? What rulemaking authority does this thing you're doing, what does it activate? What enforcement mechanism accompanies it? And what is the fiscal appropriation to fund it? Because language is where power hides. And in the first third of what we were talking about today, where we talked about expanding power, putting things in commissions, that's where power hides. And that's where bureaucracy is built. It's built in the language. Emily, thoughts?
Well, these are really good. What I'm thinking is, if somebody that is listening today is being introduced to this concept for the first time, everything you just said right now, it might be a little overwhelming, and that's a compliment. So I want to back up, because
Yeah, do it.
I think that there is a level of disconnect from voters to what this realm is. And maybe I'm just jaded a little, but I also feel like I have lived through some crazy amount of growth serving in this position, and
Yes.
realizing how big it is and how important it is that we understand this, not just like those that got elected, but our community. We
Yeah.
really need to understand, what is a statute?
Oh,
What is rulemaking authority even mean? And how is that activated? What enforcement mechanism accompanies that? What is an enforcement mechanism? And then when you say fiscal appropriation funds, does our community know what that means? Do they
I think
understand that there's money, there's monetary funding, there's budgets, there's millions, there's lots of zeros behind that dollar sign? This is pretty heavy.
yeah.
And
I,
if
I
we
think
talk
to answer
more,
your question, I think most people call statute law.
Mhm,
I could be wrong as I stutter, but I think most people would call statute law.
mhm.
The Utah state law says. Rulemaking authority, I don't know if they truly understand that. Let's break that down for a little bit. So the Administrative Procedures Act in Utah delegates rulemaking authority to every, we'll call it, agency. And it does delegate that to the Utah State Board of Education as well. But the Utah State Board of Education is constitutionally sanctioned. And so we can make rule without an act of the legislature. And we often do. A great number of our rules are made without an act of the legislature. But rulemaking authority is activated when they pass a law. And I don't know if anybody ever remembered when Nancy Pelosi famously said, we have to pass the law to find out what's in it. That's what she was referencing. She was being very serious because the rule-making authority tells us what's in the law. It's that second level down. Usually some unelected individual is making those rules. Does that help clarify?
It does. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
I'm
I think that's please go ahead.
No, well, I was just going to say, I do feel like every single one of these subjects is going to deserve a podcast. And our
Yeah.
goal is that we get to grow as a state, to
Mhm.
understand why it's so important and how it's so important and how it actually works it's just not a pretty face you're electing, or it
Yeah.
is somebody that understands this system. I think that we need to start asking different questions, better questions, more around this view instead of those hot topic words that you just mentioned. Equity, justice, evidence-based best practices. Those are the easy answers. They
Oh.
make the crowd happy.
Mm-hmm.
But if the crowd showed up with these other questions, you guys, you will hear a completely different debate on that stage. And
Oh,
we're at a point where that debate needs to start happening.
absolutely. And when people say, I oppose this, well, if it's already existing in the space that you're living in, for example, radical DEI, everybody who ran was opposed to radical DEI. Have they done anything about it?
And can I highlight that? Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because when
Yeah, go ahead.
it was actually CRT.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I called my, delegates, I mean, 80% of them asked about that. Now, we don't reference CRT. I mean, we're 3 years, we're entering our 4th year now.
Yeah.
It's DEI.
Yes.
So the buzzword shifted. Now, we won't go down that rabbit hole, but
No.
it's just to highlight that just in that short time frame,
Mm-hmm.
something around the same, subject, the terminology shifted, but that the work around it remained the same. So
Absolutely. And it's still in our schools. 3 years later, it's still fully embedded in our schools, despite an act of the legislature with multiple exceptions and exemptions. It is still there and still powerfully moving forward, which is why language is where power hides. So many of our laws have nullification clauses in them. The example I gave when I spoke to somebody is that in R277123, we put some accountability measures in place, and we had a list of things that our local education agencies could do in certain situations. Believe it or not, one of them, it had an or, and or words matter. You hear me say that all the time. Words matter. There was an or. 13 things, or you can tell us to pound sand.
yes,
Not quotable, but you can tell us to pound sand. That is what allows policy to live or die, because you can write great policy and the people will cheer, but if you put a nullification clause into it, it's completely neutered. It has no power to do what you've asked it to do. And then here we are years later, and people are saying, but we wrote a law. But if you nullify it within that policy or create purposeful loopholes, and we've seen the videos in educational spaces where they say, well, they wrote a loophole into the law. And we've talked about that in those spaces. And so that is where power hides, is in the language. And people need to understand what it looks like and how it plays out, because ambiguous language allows policy to move forward without resistance. So you don't want ambiguous language in your policy. You want it to be clear, forthright, and readable, because you'll hear things like the plain language says this, and ambiguous language can say whatever you want it to say. So a literate voter requires precision from their lawmakers and definitions in their code. Thoughts?
I love this subject. I'm going to expand out on that a little bit.
Yeah.
You will see words and
Mm-hmm.
do this and this, and do
Mm-hmm.
this and this, or you may, you
Mm-hmm.
shall. What am I
Yes.
forgetting? All of those direct a different approach and a
Mm-hmm.
different action. So as you're
Yes.
reading through these bills and you see and shall or may,
Mm-hmm.
whatever of those other words, pay attention
Yep.
to that, because it's either a nullification clause, it is clear as kind. You hear that? Clear as kind.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
If it's pretty clear and it doesn't like worm in that loophole, maybe it landed where it's supposed to land. Like, this is just a different way to bring literacy into how to read a bill. So anybody
Ab-
go pick your bill, look for the ands, mays, shalls, ors, see what you find. Let us know.
Absolutely. And look for, does it create rulemaking?
Yes.
Look for, does it exempt or accept anything. Except means like except is provided in X, except is provided in X. Or, for example, one bill that was written for K-12 schools exempted any school that accepted federal funds, which is all of them. So it was technically a nullification. The exemption clause nullified the code lines themselves. So, I think that goes to maybe what could be a next point, Emily, and that is that structural literacy also means tracing how authority moves and breathes through the different parts of our government, because administrative agencies, um, in my opinion, are the bane of our existence, but they cause so much confusion. And when you create policy at the legislature, policy creates rulemaking, and rulemaking creates enforcement, hopefully. Enforcement requires data,
Yeah.
and data collection will create institutional dependency. So let's just talk about that really quick, because when a candidate supports policies that expand data collection and extend authority into private family matters, or encourage behavioral or psychological conditioning frameworks within educational environments, they are not simply supporting reform. They are supporting what I would call is authoritarianism, because without privacy, there is no freedom. Not my line. A very wise woman once said that, and I have used it over and over and over again. Without privacy, there is no freedom. Let's kind of
Mm.
stop there, and I'm going to just repeat it. When a candidate supports policies that expand data collection, extend authority into private family matters, or encourage behavioral or psychological conditioning frameworks within different environments, they are not supporting reform. They're supporting something much more nefarious. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that when you hear and sit and listen to a candidate speak, ask yourself those questions.
Mm,
So write those down and just ask. You will listen to their
yeah.
responses differently, and you will get to know them on a different level. Because when it comes down to it, if you don't agree with extending school authority into the private family matters and everything that you had
Hmm.
just mentioned, and they're using and answering those questions in a way that implies that maybe they don't understand what their belief systems will manifest, or they actually
Hmm.
believe that there's an authority that exists in that realm, then you know your candidate better. So listen, ask those questions while that person is speaking, and you will get to know them that much quicker.
Yeah, I would agree. Because I think more than just schools can invade the family. The Department of Health can invade the family. The tax commission, all the PIDs that they're creating, public infrastructure districts.
Mhm.
Sorry, I try to talk in acronyms,
Or
but
all the acronyms.
it's so important, because when these kind of policies pass, they are reshaping institutional boundaries, and
Mhm.
boundaries matter. A healthy constitutional system depends on clear distinctions between home and school, parent and institution, between local governance in your local community and centralized authority at the state. A perfect example is the bill that went through the legislature this session that sends all of your local property tax to the state to centralize authority before they send it back to your local district. And I don't know if you know other spaces that have done that, but if you don't understand how that is centralizing authority, and by authority, I mean authoritarian. It is an authoritarian process that has been put in place and created things. And so asking those questions, does it draw clear distinctions between home and school, parent and institution, local governance and centralized authority? Because candidates who cannot articulate those boundaries, they won't defend them because they don't know what they are, which means your candidate not only needs to be literate, but you as a voter needs to be literate.
Absolutely. This is a really heavy hitter, and it can feel very overwhelming
Hmm.
because it can spiral out of control so
Yeah.
quickly.
Hmm.
And why do you feel that this might actually spiral out of control? Like why do we keep seeing things like this, like the example that you just gave, where people think it's a good idea? What do they forget when they? You don't have to answer that question. I know it's kind of big.
No, people have been asking me, name names, drop names. We have people that serve in our state legislature here in our state that lust for power. And putting something like that in place gives the state more power. Putting things into non-governmental organizations or NGOs or 3P relationships gives corporations more power. And so the reason we shouldn't do that is because we want the family to have power. We want the people to have power. We certainly don't want to be governed by corporations. Ultimately, that's fascism. We don't want a beefed up centralized government because we know that that devolves into communism. And so we don't want those things, but those are the policies, and the policy pathway is important too. As you vet candidates, look at the policy pathway,
Hmm.
because if you're passing that, but I would argue it's happening because people are power hungry. There's a book that I'll put in the description that talks about different power dynamics and what they are. And it would be who of us to read it. It's not a beach read, but it would be who of us to read it because you will understand why people lust after power and why these policies, as they're put into place, create an authoritarian framework, and you're just building the foundation before somebody throws up the walls. And the foundation is fully in place in our state for authoritarianism to take over. So I think vetting candidates who know what that looks like and know how to take it down and also will say no to its advancement is super important.
Absolutely. I don't know if we are going to get to the power of no, the power of no vote, but we can bring
I,
that later.
yeah, let's talk about the power of the no vote when we break down the language question. When we talk about decoding political language, let's talk about the power of the no vote and kind of combine that into one podcast because I think it's going to be a powerful question. I think even beneath that, there's even deeper question. And as you evaluate candidates, what philosophy of humanity does the candidate hold? Emily, what do you think about when you think about that question?
Do they see children as citizens to be formed?
Uh-huh.
Are there data points to be tracked?
Hmm.
Ideological vessels that are to be shaped? I've seen so much of that. So much of that.
Oh,
Um, their worldview precedes their policy.
sorry. I'm hitting nails on the head, right? Because
There's economic inputs to be optimized.
oh,
There's a
yep.
lot of
Hmm.
working parts to that.
Yeah, absolutely. You just kept hitting the nail on the head. Do they see children as, the future workforce? When I hear candidates say, well, these children are our future workforce, I'm like, ding, 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 red flag. When I hear them say, we've got to prepare them for the future that they're holding, that's an economic input to be optimized. We have to, the PK20 pipeline was a policy decision that tracks child from cradle to grave, cradle into workforce. And to me, those are deeply problematic policies. You're right. Worldview precedes policy always. And you need to know what your candidate's worldview is, in particular, their worldview about the inherent equality of man and the value of humanity and how the value of humanity and liberty interface, if you will.
Well, I think maybe some people might be questioning or
Hmm.
stating that, well, we want our kids to come out of the education system educated with skill
Hmm.
set. There's nothing wrong with that. And I just want to clarify, I feel like I need to clarify that I'm not against that at all. Like there is benefit, and education is
Hmm.
morphing and changing and shifting, and we're trying
Hmm.
to keep up with the demands of what our modern world looks like. But I want to take kind of set this straight.
Hmm.
We have to back up to what we were just highlighting
Hmm.
about the freedom of being, of living, the freedom of existing.
Mhm.
That is it the economics to be optimized? Are they shaping citizens so that they are forming their belief systems, their
Mhm.
voting patterns, the way that they engage in the world around them, the way that they view authority, you know,
Mhm.
like support it, align to it, have it what you will. I'm not saying that I'm not fighting against educating our kids or having them leave with skill sets, but we need to keep
Oh,
in mind what it is we're doing. And we have to be aware of how our education system is developing and guiding society as a whole. We don't have to just be mindless robots that just get pumped out and,
mhm.
graduated and on to the next thing. Like, we can actually form human beings.
Absolutely. I think you're bringing us back to the question that you have really helped me embrace, and that question is, why do we send our children to school? It's not the purpose of this conversation, but it it really brings us back to that. We send them to school to acquire academic skills as opposed to so many other things. And so I think when we're evaluating policy, we really need to look at that and ask those questions. So we've hit worldview. So we're going to take a step back, and I think we should talk about the direction of a generation because we need to look at the larger trajectory. When voters elect someone into office, they are not merely choosing leadership for 2 years, or in the case of our Senate or governor, for 4 years. They're actually shaping precedent for an entire generation. And so tell me, Emily, what are questions to ask to know how this person is going to put policies in place that produce precedent? What are those questions so that people can understand better how the individuals they're vetting will act in that policy making space? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think some of these are the deeper questions that we probably ask ourselves. Does the candidate protect parental authority? And do they know what that looks like when it gets into a policy? What does that look like when that belief lands in a policy? Like, do they protect parental authority? Do they respect the privacy boundaries between school and family life? Like, what does that
Great
mean to
one.
them? And you can ask them that. What does that mean to you? Do they promote informed and voluntary consent when policies affect children
Yeah, or when they affect adults.
or adults? Yeah,
Yeah, I would
absolutely.
argue that adults as well. If we can back up, I think when you're asking these questions, which by the way, great questions, Emily.
Mhm.
When you're asking these questions, what does that look like in policy? Not just does the candidate respect the privacy boundaries, but do they understand what those words look like when they're written down? And when privacy boundaries are not respected, what do those words look like? Like
Absolutely.
that goes back to understanding what code looks like. And these are policymakers. They shouldn't be learning on the job. This is not an internship. Policymakers should be prepared when they walk in the room to engage in that space. And it's so important. So important. Please continue. Thank you for allowing my tangent.
Oh, absolutely. No, feedback is good. I have a few more questions that I've thought of. Do they promote informed and voluntary consent when policies affect children? Do
Hmm.
they create checks and balances within governance structures? So that one's a heavy hitter.
Hmm.
As what are the checks and what are the balances? Those are two separate things in a rule
Yeah.
or a policy.
Yeah.
Completely two different things.
Yep. Well, and in governance structures, not just in rulemaking, but within an agency, what's the check? Where's the check on the board? Where's the check on the superintendent, for example, in the USBE? Who is the place where we have the check is often the balance in many cases. I love that. It's a great question. And not only will they create it, do they understand it? And then do they know what it looks like in policy language? And ask your candidates to give you examples of what that looks like.
Yes, absolutely. Do they normalize collective authority over individual autonomy?
Oh, ding, 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 ding. That's a buzzword. People are going to use that word, collective. For example, in one of our last elections, a candidate for a school board kept saying, our community's children.
Yes.
The last time the community gave birth was never. The children who reside in the community is a different way of stating that. And you'll notice that the presupposition to those two statements will reveal a different worldview in both statements. So be very careful when people are speaking, because they'll use very passionate and sometimes even romantic language to define things that sounds good, but ask yourself how it's activated, because the children do not belong to the state, as evidenced by our SCOTUS ruling yesterday. Yay.
Yes.
Um, just really great things. What other questions are you thinking of, Emily? You do great ones.
Do they expand administrative insulation from voters?
Ooh, can we unpack that?
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's important to understand that. So when people have voted, so if you're vetting a candidate that currently serves, have they created administrative agencies? Have they created study sessions, commissions, cohorts, all of these things to delay action, to delay accountability, or to insulate things from voters? So, for example, when policymakers don't want accountability, they'll put into code, well, so and so needs to write rule on this, and then all of the accountabilities in that rule. And then what happens is they'll say, oh, well, I didn't do that. That was the administrative agency that did that. And then there's no voter accountability except to kick the guy to the curb that put that into policy to begin with. Did I hit that one well?
Yes, I think it highlights another issue that comes to
Hmm.
understanding the person that you're vetting, your candidate, or
Hmm.
their record, is that so much of the accountability actually is lost in this step, I think. And even people that vote, they all have their reasons why they vote the way that they do. And unfortunately, it is because it gets weighed down by
Hmm.
process, by bureaucracy is another word that we
Hmm.
use a lot. So we have to know how to unpack all of those steps. And so,
Yep.
you know, there is a lot of learning. I hope people don't get overwhelmed by it. We are here to help highlight what that looks like again. So we are
Hmm.
asking different and better questions to our candidates.
It's in a
And
form. It's a candidate vetting form. It's out there. It was made public a couple of years ago, but we can I can
we
put it in there. Yeah,
chat
and share it.
and bring it back. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, so, a couple more. Do they
Hmm.
create cultures of compliance rather than cultures of excellence?
Ooh, I have an example of this. Is this a
Yep.
time I can put that in? HB 502 in the current legislative session is a great example of this. It is a bill that advances a social credit score for children on their report cards. They're going to be graded on their honesty, on their integrity. Well, and we all know that integrity no longer means doing the right thing when no one is watching. It has a completely new definition. It's different in every school, but it's not what you think it is. It creates a social credit score. And so it's going to create a culture of compliance as opposed to a culture of excellence. And so when you look at your policymakers, you really need to ask that question. Are they advancing and supporting policy that creates cultures of excellence as opposed to cultures of compliance? Because nothing will degrade liberty faster than extra rules and the surveillance state. When you're constantly being surveilled and measured, it does something here to not just children, but to humanity. And Emily, you've done such great work. These are not abstract questions that you've asked. They're actually very poignant questions. Excuse me, and they're so beautiful. They determine what kind of civic culture emerges in the next generation. And if enough of these questions are asked, it's going to change the face of our state and our nation within the next 5 years.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, I
Hmm.
think the last question, the cultures of compliance.
Yeah.
rather than cultures of excellence.
Mm-hmm.
And when we started, it's like in 204,
Mm-hmm.
those were qualities of excellence. And they
Yes.
were qualities of excellence because they came from here. They came
Mm-hmm.
from our hearts. They came
Yeah.
from a moral compass. They came
Mm-hmm.
from our own decision, and understanding on how to become that. And we
Yeah.
find ourselves in a unique place where there is just so much this level of a culture of compliance.
Yeah.
It falls underneath the guise of everybody has to be safe, everybody has to be kind,
Yeah.
everybody has to, you know, think of their community. Those are two different, completely different realms and completely
Mm-hmm.
different ways to approach life. So that is another realm that I would say, what is your candidate? Like, what's the language that they use to
Mm-hmm.
have them define what is the culture of excellence and where does it come from? Who prompts that?
That's an excellent prompt. Repeat that, would you please?
What is the culture of excellence and who prompts that?
Yeah, great question for candidates as we're vetting them in this next election cycle. I think it's important because these are the questions voters should ask. And Emily, I think we've done a great job in just this opening act, if you will. We're going to break down political language and how to decode that in a future episode. We're going to talk about the power of the no vote, which is so poignant in this day and age. These are questions that voters should ask because institution drifts when no one tracks their trajectory, and personnel is policy. Power never drifts toward neutrality, it drifts toward consolidation unless the citizens of our state and nation intentionally restrain it. Anything else for our listeners before we close up today, Emily?
Um, Not a lot. I know we've covered a lot of territory. I think
Mhm.
if I were to just reinforce anything from today's conversation, candidates, they can look good, but if we can go into this session differently, this election cycle differently, I want you to listen to their voice first and how they respond to the questions that you're asking. And I
Mhm.
hope that we are asking different questions. I think it requires us to ask better questions, deeper questions, questions that are more specific, that we know that they understand policy, and that if their campaign speech sounds really good, that they actually know how that will translate with their vote.
Absolutely. I think that's a question that could be asked if I could. Great speech. How is this going to be manifested in a vote? What does that look like? Before we close, I want us to remember this. Elections are not personality contests, they are structural decisions. Every candidate elected becomes an architect of an institutional direction. Laws shape systems, systems shape children, children shape nations. Liberty declines when voters outsource discernment, and literacy declines when citizens stop reading policy. Legacy declines when convenience replaces courage. Don't ask yourself whether or not you like a candidate. Ask whether or not they understand constitutional limits, whether they respect institutional boundaries, whether they restrain power as opposed to rationalizing its expansion. Ask whether an incumbent's record aligns with their rhetoric. Because if you cannot explain what a candidate's policies actually do, not what they say, but what they do, you're not ready to vote for them. Education forms habits, habits form citizens, and citizens form nations. And nations do not collapse because evil suddenly appears. They collapse because voters stopped paying attention. This work is not dramatic, it is discipline, and it requires vigilance. It requires literacy, and it requires citizens willing to work beyond the next election cycle. I'm Christina Boggess, and this has been Liberty, Literacy, and Legacy. Vet your candidates wisely, build wisely, and we are going to continue this conversation next week. Have a great night.
Vetting candidates is a forensic endeavor.